What would you do if your own neighbors accused you of causing a hurricane and then demanded 10 million bucks, all because your house was the last one still standing? I'm not kidding. Picture the morning after Hurricane Helene. The entire neighborhood looked like a war zone, roofs peeled open like sardine cans, power lines drooping across driveways, trees snapped in half, just total devastation. Families wandering barefoot through the mess, clutching whatever the storm hadn't swallowed up. But there, at the dead end of Harbor Point Drive, one house stood tall, barely a scratch on it, my place, the Whitford house. And I promise you I wasn't feeling proud, just bone-tired and wrung out. Neighbors stopped in their tracks. Some stared like they'd seen a ghost. Others, I swear, looked at me like I'd just gotten away with something. Our two-story with the storm shutters and that thick, reinforced foundation, it looked almost untouched, a white ship in a sea of splinters. The contrast was so glaring, it didn't take long for the whispers to start. I heard a guy mutter, dragging a tarp over the ruins of his garage. Because he knew something, another voice replied, just loud enough for me to hear. Let me back up a sec. The truth is, it wasn't luck. It was weeks of prep. Every spare dollar I had, every late night I could steal from sleep, I poured into reinforcing that house sweat plywood prayers and more YouTube how-tos than I care to admit. But instead of good for you, what I felt in those stares was pure resentment. Inside, my wife Monica peered through the blinds and whispered, "They're looking at us like we did something wrong." I just shook my head. Let them look. We did what we had to do, but deep down I knew this wasn't over. The storm hadn't just wiped out homes, it had wiped out patience, money, and whatever tolerance folks had left. People wanted a target. And by the end of that week, that target had my name on it, Andre Whitford. It all blew up at the emergency HOA meeting held in the half-wrecked community center. People shuffled in still in sweats and hoodies bruised from hauling debris. That's when Vivian Crosswell, the HOA president, perfect navy blazer hair, never out of place, stood up and announced every house was destroyed except one. One home stood while ours crumbled. Does anyone here find that strange? The murmurs in that room felt like they'd already settled the verdict. Vivian didn't waste time. She said Mr. Whitford claims he prepared, but we believe his modifications disrupted the natural wind patterns, redirecting the storm and magnifying the damage to surrounding properties. I jumped up. You're blaming me for a hurricane for nature. Vivian just smiled her thin, lawyerly smile. We're not blaming you for nature, Mr. Whitford. We're blaming you for manipulating it to your benefit. And this association demands accountability. Accountability. That word rattled around the room like a loaded gun. Monica gripped my arm nails, digging in. 10 million. That's insane. But Vivian just tapped her folder shut and said, insane is dozens of families losing their homes while yours stands untouched. I looked around and saw nothing but suspicion and envy staring back. Walking out of that meeting, I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a witch hunt. It was about resentment control and something uglier bubbling under the surface. By the next morning, I got served with a thick envelope on my porch. Formal demand from the Harbor Point HOA, $10 million in damages. Said my unnatural modifications caused catastrophic wind redirection. I laughed, but not in a way that felt good. Vivian's lost her mind, I muttered, slamming those papers on the kitchen table. Monica's eyes went wide reading it. Andre, this isn't just gossip, this is legal. They're threatening to sue. I rubbed my temples. Who has 10 million bucks? Soon word spread like wildfire. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to me in years were knocking on my door, some with sympathy, but others angry. Caroline Bowers, her house destroyed, showed up with her little boy in tow and spat, "You should pay for what you did." I said, Caroline, I worked, I planned, I reinforced my house. Be mad at the storm, not me. But she just shook her head. Vivian's right, you manipulated things. It got worse. Friends I'd helped shovel snow, folks I'd lent tools to, they looked at me now like I was some kind of criminal. That week, Vivian called another HOA meeting, this time in a church basement since our center was a mess. Monica said, "You need to defend yourself or they'll spin this however they want." I showed up the room already simmering. Vivian folders stacked neat as a court clerk stared me down. "Mr. Whitford, glad you decided to join us." She laid it out. "The board believes your modifications altered the wind trajectory. You created an unnatural shield. Families suffered catastrophic losses. We seek compensation." I leaned in. "A hurricane isn't a game of billiards. My house didn't bounce the storm onto yours." A man shouted, "Then why is your house standing?" "Because I spent months preparing." "That's not luck, that's sacrifice," I said. Vivian raised a hand. "Preparation is one thing, manipulation is another. We'll let the courts decide." That's when I realized this was a show trial. Vivian wanted control, not justice. After the meeting, I caught her in the parking lot, rain drizzling, and said, "You're not after justice, you're after me." She didn't blink. "You're right, Mr. Whitford. I am after you. People like you think you can outsmart everyone and never face consequences, not this time." The neighborhood split clean in two. Some folks respected what I'd done but said nothing. Others swallowed Vivian's words, whole convinced I'd cheated nature. And plenty kept their heads down, not wanting to pick a side. I noticed the change everywhere. Conversation stopped when I walked my dog. Curtains, twitch, doors shut a little quicker. Gloria Whitman, a neighbor for 30 years, let me carry a box to her car but wouldn't look me in the eye. "They're saying you diverted the storm, Andre." I don't know what to believe. "I lost half my home and you didn't lose a shingle." I tried to explain I didn't cause this. I just prepared. But people didn't want logic. They wanted someone to blame. One night, Caleb Drummond, one of the last neighbors, still friendly, invited me to a fire pit. Over beers, he said, "Vivian's been knocking on doors, firing folks up." Another neighbor piped in, "Your house standing makes us look like fools. People aren't going to forgive that." I said, "Community isn't about dragging down the guy who survived. That's mob rule." When I got home, Monica asked, "So what now?" I said, "Now I hold my ground because if I cave once, they'll own me forever." But the story was just getting started. The next week, the whole thing went public. Reporters, cameras, headlines like, "Did one man's home cause his neighbor's destruction?" Channel 8 showed up shoving a mic in my face. "Do you deny altering the storm's course?" I said, "Of course I deny it. I'm not some weather wizard. I built my house stronger. That's it." But my words got twisted. Neighbors lined up for the cameras. Caroline said, "My son lost his bedroom. Andre's house looks brand new." Franklin Moss chimed in, "His house changed how the wind hit ours." But Caleb defended me. "Andre worked his tail off. People are angry, so they need someone to blame." Of course, that part never made the 6 o'clock news. Vivian showed up on TV too, all poise and pearls. It's about fairness. When one family benefits, justice demands balance. Monica nearly threw the remote. Fairness. She's bleeding this neighborhood dry. That's when Caleb came by with a six-pack. "You can't fight this alone. Vivian's building a narrative and the press is eating it up. You need a lawyer, Andre, someone who can go toe-to-toe with her." I hated it, but he was right. Soon enough, I met Daniela Ruiz, a lawyer with a sharp eye and a sharper tongue. She glanced over the HOA notice and said, "They have no case. But if you don't fight back, they'll bury you in paperwork." We started digging. Daniela requested HOA records. Caleb poked around board members, and pretty soon we found a smoking gun and email from Vivian weeks before the storm, worried that if my house survived, it'd make the rest look bad. Not only that, but the HOA's emergency fund had been drained $45 grand to her cousin's consulting firm, but not a cent to help families rebuild. Daniela said, "That's your story, not the hurricane nonsense." We took it public. The city council held a hearing, the chamber packed shoulder to shoulder. Vivian made her speech. "One home survived, dozens destroyed. Not chance Mr. Whitford's modifications are to blame." Daniela stood up cool as ice. "Hurricanes are acts of nature, not construction choices." Mr. Whitford reinforced his home using legal methods. "The real issue is envy, not science." She waved Vivian's email and pointed to the missing funds. Judge Jennings called for order and asked me to speak. My hands were shaking, but I told them I did what any father would do. I protected my family. I didn't cheat. I didn't conjure a storm. If I could have built every house here the same way I would have. When the council finally came back, Judge Jennings announced there is no legal basis to hold Mr. Whitford responsible. The claim is without merit. Furthermore, we recommend a full audit of the HOA's finances. For a moment, the chamber was silent. Then Caleb stood and clapped, and others followed except for Vivian, who bolted, pale and rattled, as folks shouted, "What about the money, Vivian?" Back home, Monica hugged me. "You didn't just protect us from the storm, you protected us from them." I told Allison, "You'll face a lot of storms in life. People will blame you for standing tall. But preparation isn't a crime, and if you know you're right, you hold your ground." Over the next few weeks, Vivian resigned. Neighbors started asking themselves how they'd let things go so far, and some even apologized quietly. Not everyone, but enough. I still sit on the porch at sunset sometimes thinking about what we all lost: roofs, fences, friendships, but also what we found: the danger of envy, the cost of fear, and the power of standing firm. So if you stuck with me to the end, let me ask, who would you blame if the storm missed your house? Or would you stand up for your neighbors instead? Drop your thoughts below. And if stories about justice, resilience, and the human spirit speak to you, stick around, because you never know when the next storm or the next neighbor might put you to the test.